Hello, and welcome to Remember the Film, the podcast where my Iron Man fandom gets to be flown freely for everyone to see.
Very nice.
Today, we are discussing the MCU, and we're going to start with our film to remember, which is Iron Man 3, which I think many people will find to be an unusual pick for us to discuss as a film to remember.
Interesting pick.
Yes.
From Citizen Kane to Iron Man 3. That
makes
sense
sense.
to me.
It's the logical progression.
It's a through line.
I am joined, as always, by my co-hosts. I should say I'm Grizz, and my co-hosts that are with me, as always, are Hugo and Josh.
Hello, I'm Josh.
Hi, hello.
I'm not Grizz.
I'm Hugo.
How you guys doing?
Pretty good, man. How about you?
Doing good. I had a busy week of MCU rewatching.
Yeah, I'm alright. I watched a few MCU movies this week, but
I watched Iron Man 3.
On a whim, I decided on Monday that I was going to rewatch the entire MCU before watching WandaVision, which released yesterday. And
yes.
I almost made it. I watched the entire MCU in a week, except I didn't watch Far From Home until this morning.
That counts.
Well, I mean, yeah, but I watched WandaVision last night, so...
Okay.
Oh, no.
I know.
Oh, no.
But I couldn't wait. I couldn't wait.
Yeah.
Well, so...
I haven't seen WandaVision yet. I'm watching it tonight. So
we're going to jump into Iron Man 3, our film to remember. What are your non-spoilery thoughts regarding Iron Man 3? We'll start with Josh.
I think this is cool. This is a good movie. I hadn't seen it before this week, which is crazy because I think everyone else in the world had seen it based on how much money this movie made. But yeah, like I think I've mentioned on the podcast before, I like Shane Black movies, and excuse me, like this feels like a Shane Black movie to some extent. I think that his writing and his style is pretty in tune with Robert Downey Jr.'s style and delivery, like the quippy, smart, sarcastic kind of thing. Like, Robert Downey Jr. was in a Shane Black movie before he was ever Tony Stark called Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. That's, if you haven't seen it, enormous recommendation. So good. And I think that like he brings that. It's a good meld, their styles, and it comes off in the movie. And I really like it. It's breezy. It's fun. There's good action set pieces, and I like the character work they do with Tony Stark. I think it's great.
What about you, Hugo?
And the Shane Blackness of it all is in this movie in a few different ways. It's not just dialogue. He gets to do sort of buddy cop moments with Rhodey at the end.
Yeah.
He has that relationship with the kid as well, which is very Shane Blacky in the way that it's.
That kid shows up in The Nice Guys, which Shane Black makes 3 years later, which also cannot recommend enough. The Nice Guys is amazing.
Yeah, good movie.
Yeah.
But obviously, I mean, I've seen all these movies, most of them in theaters, and I think I don't remember if I saw Iron Man 3 in theaters because I went through phases with this series, but yeah, I had seen it before, and watching it again, this is one of those MCU movies that for some reason every time I rewatch it I like it more.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah, my initial reaction to it was, oh, well, Iron Man isn't in the suit enough or whatever. I was looking at it only through the lens of it being a Marvel movie about Iron Man. But then the more I sort of get away from that and I just see it as its own thing, as a movie, that regardless of how it fits within the larger universe, and I like it more. I thought it was really fun and clever.
For me, and we'll get into it more once we're talking spoilers, for me, the first time I watched this movie, I was very disappointed. I had gone in with a certain set of expectations, and they were completely ignored. Which is fine. Now, having rewatched the movie, this is probably fifth or sixth time I've watched this movie, because I have a habit of rewatching the entire MCU every year. So, but I've seen this quite a few times, and every time I watch it, I enjoy it more, and I appreciate it more for what it does that is different from the rest of the MCU, and I appreciate it more for it as a standalone movie, as in terms of its own, your ability to enjoy it on its own. We want to start going into spoilers? Do you have any other thoughts you want to share, guys?
Before we do that, there's a few thoughts. Number one, Hugo mentioned this, that Tony's not in the suit very much, which I didn't know that about the movie going in, but that is something I also observed, and I actually kind of like that. I have nothing against superhero movies in general, but I don't rush to them the way that some other people do. It's the way you two might actually even. Right, and so like it's not that it's like less of an Iron Man movie, but I think it's more character based than just like set piece based. Maybe that's an unfair assessment, but like he is like just a guy with a gun for a lot of it, which does make it more of like an investigative crime thriller. Yeah. As much as it's a superhero movie, like again, like it's a Shane Black movie, like Hugo said, very good observation about it has a lot of buddy cop elements, and I guess maybe that's like something I'm more drawn to than like I'm more inclined to watch Kiss Bang Bang than I am to watch the first Iron Man, for example. Yeah. And I think maybe this kind of has a good mix of both, and so I kind of responded to it more for that reason.
I think on that, it's very much a Tony Stark movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for
perhaps
sure.
more than it is an Iron Man movie.
Yeah, for sure.
Which I think works, since it's a sequel, and since we already had Iron Man in 2 movies, we already had Iron Man in the first Avengers movie. It's cool to have this third installment of the series being a Tony Stark film.
Especially in the context of the MCU, the events that preceded this actually feeds very well into a story-driven, character-driven, movie about Tony Stark.
Yeah, so actually 2 things about that. Number 1, I like that this movie acknowledges the real life trauma that could come from the events that these characters go through in the other movies. But it also like you don't need to have seen the Avengers to understand like he's going through some stuff now, and like kind of you don't really need that context. All you need to know that is he has post-traumatic stress basically. But what Hugo said, this is a Tony Stark movie. I also like there's a lot of imagery of like Tony and Iron Man as separate entities. Like obviously in like one of the not first scenes, but in the first half hour, like Iron Man has a conversation with Pepper and Tony's ostensibly inside the suit. Then it turns out he's not. He's actually somewhere else. So like that is a visual separation of Tony and Iron Man. And then later, like, around in the second act at some point, he's in Tennessee and there's an image of Tony literally dragging the suit behind him as if it is his baggage. Iron Man is his literal baggage. That's the image they're going for there. And when he meets the kid says, "Is that Iron Man?" pointing to the suit, and then Tony says, "Technically I am," which again is like there's a lot of stuff like that where it's like separating Tony and Iron Man, and other superhero movies have done this, the duality of the man versus the hero, whether it be Raimi's Spider-Man 2 did this, Batman Forever did this, the Joel Schumacher movie, which I read Batman Forever, don't get me wrong. So like I like that, and I think that not into spoilers yet, but I think the payoff of that is the finale, where there's not a lot of Iron Man in the first 2/3, but there's a lot of Iron Man in the finale. I think is the payoff.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's go into some spoiler discussion here, just so that we don't accidentally say something.
Sure.
And I was going to say, starting with what Josh was saying, the finale, not just the final set piece, but the actual ending of Tony destroying the suits. And, he still does say in the voiceover, "Oh, I am Iron Man, but I'm not going to be that obsessive kind of superhero. I'm not going to be in my garage just making suits all the time. I am still Iron Man," but then he's sort of reconciled the 2 sides of his identity in a way. Like Iron Man before was a baggage, and now he's decided to move on to.
And it's not just
he makes a choice to change the way that he views that part of his identity.
It's not just a baggage; it's also his coping mechanism. He survived the events of the Avengers entirely because of his suit of armor, and I think that contributes to him feeling unsafe as Tony Stark. So when he has his panic attack, the first thing he does is run outside and get into his armor. So it's his way of protecting himself, and that's where he feels most comfortable. So that's also why he's building all these different suits of armor that do different things. It's to solve, I imagine they're all designed with like one new element to solve a very specific problem that he encountered and never wants to have to face again. And so he has all these different models to do one thing for each thing, just to give him peace of mind that if that problem arises again, I'm covered.
That's really smart because another thing he does I like the thing that where he has a panic attack and runs to his suit. That's a good observation about his coping. But also, he can't sleep at night, and his solution to that is to go tinker with his suit some more.
Yeah,
he doesn't have he doesn't have the peace of mind. So working on the suits gives him that peace of mind, like you said, Grizz, just now. But the payoff of that is that his suit literally attacks his Pepper in their sleep. Like while he's sleeping, his suit attacks her, which is quite the inversion of what he's afraid of and trying to prevent. I think that's all good stuff.
Well, so all this introspection on Tony Stark is only one part of this movie. Another big facet of the movie is the villains of the movie. It's a very common trope in superhero movies that the villain is created by a decision made by the hero.
The hero. Yeah.
In this case, it was a decision made by Tony Stark prior to becoming Iron Man, where he belittles this character Aldrich Killian at a conference, and tricks him into going up onto the roof and abandoning him there, and and he's stuck out there. And that is the moment that Aldrich Killian decides he's gonna change his life, and he'll step on anybody to do it. So we go from, and this is the trope, that we go from this nerd, and Aldrich Killian looks like the nerd that you expect for a superhero movie, and I'm sure everyone's seen the meme.
He's very much a stereotype.
Yes,
the meme where they Aldrich Killian, and then they also have Jamie Foxx's character from Amazing Spider-Man 2 and
Amazing Spider-Man 2, yeah.
Uma Thurman from Batman and Robin.
Yes.
I'm pretty sure is in that. Yeah.
Everyone's wearing glasses and looks disheveled.
Usually curly hair.
Yeah.
And then they just become stone cold hotties when they become villains. Yeah.
So that is the trope.
Yes.
Apparently, it's very attractive to be evil. So that
also
go ahead.
Real quick, but that trope I want to point out. The Incredibles also kind of does it with Buddy, who becomes Syndrome.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
what I love about that is not only is that trope present in like a macro sense, but also when Killian reveals himself to be the Mandarin to Tony, it's like staged exactly as that reveal is staged in The Incredibles, because like to the point that like Tony's hands are bound up here, and like his female assistant is like endangered, and like same with The Incredibles where Mr. Incredible's bound up here and endangers the female assistant. It's all, I don't know. I thought that was a fun connection to make.
So Aldrich is, we find out throughout the course of the movie, is going to become the villain. But the other main villain of this movie is the Mandarin, or we're led to believe is the Mandarin, and the 10 Rings, his organization, which is the reason we're watching Iron Man 3 this week, is because the 10 Rings are, of course, going to feature quite heavily in an upcoming Marvel release, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the 10 Rings.
Yeah.
So,
and they were also in Iron Man 1.
And they were also in Iron Man 1. The 10 Rings was the organization that Obadiah Stane hired to kill Tony Stark, and then they didn't kill Tony, and then Tony built an Iron Man suit, and the rest is history. So the Mandarin in the comic books is a character, and is basically Iron Man's biggest villain. He's the most frequent reappearing villain, and is comparable to Tony in a lot of ways in that they are both super geniuses, very intelligent, and but their power sets are wildly different. In the Mandarin in the comics uses 10 rings of power that do different things, like disintegration and stuff like that. Really cool things, but those never appeared in the movies so far. So I'm hoping that when they bring the Mandarin back in Shang-Chi, we'll get to see that treatment of the Mandarin. But in this movie, the Mandarin is not the one we're going to see in Shang-Chi.
He's an actor.
He's an actor.
In the way that... actor. I am an actor. In the way that he said... Okay, so the twist is, as you were saying, that the Mandarin is just this figure that Aldrich Killian has made up to sort of use as a scapegoat for these weird experiments that he's doing on people.
Yeah, well,
right?
Aldrich Killian is setting off explosions,
Yeah.
with people, turning people into human bombs, and to create the situation he needs to complete his final goal, which is controlling the government.
Yeah. Although I think he's saying controlling. Okay, this is the part that I don't like about the film, is his motivation is a bit
It's
murky.
weak.
I was
for
just
me.
going to ask.
Yeah, like he just wants to
having only seen the
control the war on terror.
Having
or
only seen the
whatever.
movie once, well, I guess he does actually say at one point he's going to control the terrorists and control the people fighting the
Yeah.
terrorists. But like,
Yeah.
He says
Yeah.
it, but it's not like very clear why.
yeah,
To what end?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Money, I
So
guess? I don't
he's
know.
already like a successful businessman. He has this creation that he thinks is going to be revolutionary because the way he sees it is sort of an evolution of man that turning people into
Well, and it
bomb. like,
would be
it-
revolutionary. The healing aspects of the extremist
Yeah.
program,
But he
you can heal. You can
uses it to
regrow
make
limbs.
human bombs.
That's great.
It would be, but it's kind of, it's the part of the film that I think doesn't work is that like he injects these subjects with this chemical that either turns them into a human bomb and makes them literally explode if they're unlucky, or if they're lucky, it allows them to become really strong and to be able to like shoot fire or whatever. I feel like the villain is the weakest part of the film, but I think it works anyway because of the way that he's connected to Tony and because I think the action set pieces in this are so clever in the ways they use
Josh, then
Iron
you.
Man and Tony.
Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah.
Well, I also think it's interesting. This wasn't the thing I was going to say before, but it's interesting how much it's tied to like defense contracts. Like that was like kind of Tony's thing in the first movie.
Yeah.
Is he built his fortune on death, and then kind of had a change of heart. And like Killian is also doing that, but without the change of heart. He's actually going the opposite direction and trying to, control both terrorists and the U.S. government's military response to it. But what I was going to say is, you mentioned like him Killian like recruiting people to take part in this, to get this injection that would either turn them into human bombs and kill them or make them superhuman. A friend of mine who listens to this, he said that he thinks this movie is the subtext is media as a form of radicalization. And so Killian is obviously like media savvy because he has a front for his villainy, a face for his villainy, an actor literally, and produces these terrorist videos, and also like has a stage for theatrical in the third act when he's gonna kill the president again, like in like a media setting for no reason, or he's gonna stage a reason for killing the president. And but the people he's recruiting to get these injections are all like broken in some way or missing something in their lives, and whether it be literally a limb or something else, and so they are willing to give themselves to this cause in order to make themselves whole again. And that is there's a risk involved in that, but they're willing to take that risk because it's going to make them whole again if it works. And so that is like again, I think that's a savvy observation on my friend's part, that is like a radicalization thing via media that Killian's exploiting.
One thing I wanted to touch on with what Hugo was saying was, you said that the villain is the weakest part of this movie, and I think what I would say is Aldrich Killian, the villain, is one of the weakest parts of the movie. The Mandarin, Trevor Slattery, the actor playing, Sir Ben Kingsley.
The twist with him.
That twist, while it really upset me when I first watched the movie because I was expecting the actual Mandarin and I thought Ben Kingsley was playing the Mandarin, and and the way his first intro video, all the little terrorist videos he does are scary. They're twisted, and it's like, oh wow, they've really made a cool villain. And then they flip the script, and that upset me at first. But like as I've said, the more I've rewatched it, the more I've come to appreciate that twist. But so I would say that the Mandarin, Trevor Slattery, is a great part of the movie. It's part of what makes this movie so unique in terms of the MCU. Every other movie, who the villain is basically the entire time, and there's no surprise there. Whereas
Let me
this
ask
one
you this.
offers a pretty substantial surprise. Yeah, what's up?
Why did it upset you the first time you saw it?
It
Like, I know
upset me.
that's not an uncommon thing, by the way. A lot of people seem to be like put off by that. I knew that twist going in, so like I wasn't put off by it, but like a lot of people were. So walk me through why that.
So I
was
think
upsetting.
part of it was the bait and switch. Was that they hooked me into believing that this was the villain, and especially as a diehard Iron Man fan, I've read the comics for years, and was I was very, very much looking forward to the Mandarin, and then I didn't get the Mandarin that I was expecting, and so it's comic book fanboyism, that led me to be disappointed by this movie. That I wanted it to be exactly as I expected it to be, and it wasn't. So I was disappointed. That being said, I still liked the movie when I first watched it. I like it more and more every time since, because I've grown to just accept, okay, this isn't the comic books. This is its own universe, telling its own stories, and sometimes they're going to break pretty significantly from the comics, and you just kind of have to accept that this is the narrative. And it's the same way I approach Star Wars movies, where people don't like changes that were made to characters in Star Wars. I'm like, no, that's their story. That's the story of the characters.
People also don't like when they're expecting one thing and the movies give them another thing, i.e. The Last Jedi, where they spent 2 years theorizing about this and that, and then it's just completely not that, and they got really, really, really mad about it.
I was going to say, I can understand the reaction of people being really disappointed at first. Now, I didn't immediately go get online and give this movie a 0 review score on every site or anything like that. I was disappointed.
And send death threats to Shane Black and
nothing like that. No. That is insane. And and so I think it was just that initial disappointment was what it was for me, that it wasn't what I was expecting, and it wasn't until rewatching it the second and the third and the fourth time that I realized it's okay that this wasn't what I was expecting. This is actually pretty cool.
Yeah, and for me,
go ahead.
I've never been. I've always thought these characters were cool, but I've never been able to get into the comic books much, because my problem with the comic books is that there's too many of them. There's too many timelines, too many reboots, too many that sort of thing. It's very difficult for me to accept a canon that isn't a block. Like it would be easier for me to, like, for some reason, for example, I've read some of the Ultimate Universe, which is the alternate timeline of the Marvel Universe, because that one is a bit more concise. Like,
it's because it started in 2005.
This block of story.
So
yeah, exactly. And so, but it's kind of tough for
1940.
me. I agree completely, and I think the medium of comic books is the way that it is, and I think it's great. It's just not what I'm interested in storytelling. I like when there's conclusions. I like when there's consequences that matter in the long term. I like when characters don't come back and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So not knowing the comic books, when I watched the first time I watched this movie, I didn't think much about it. I just thought, oh, he's not very much in the suit, and that's a bit whatever. I came to see an Iron Man movie. Why is he not doing Iron Man stuff? But then rewatching it later, and the first time, I have to say, I watched it in Italian in a theater. So the thing is, the jokes didn't land at all. It wasn't funny because it's translated, dubbed Shane Black jokes, so they weren't funny at all. And rewatching it again, I think this is the third time I've seen it, fourth time. But rewatching it first of all, the humor of it landed a lot more, and I think some of the jokes in this, both the visual jokes and the actual lines that they're saying, are fantastic, really funny. The relationship with the kid is great, and the twist itself I really appreciated, because the second time that I watched it, I was like, oh, this villain, the Mandarin, is such a stereotype. It's such a, it's like a really American stereotype of a Middle Eastern terrorist, and I thought, oh, this is a bit icky in some ways.
Sure.
And I think that's what Shane Black is doing. I think the point
he's using that against you. He's using that against the audience. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the idea is that the actual villain in the movie knows that America as a society will react to that type of character in that way, and therefore he creates this stereotypical character. even though he's actually just some guy from Britain who's a failed actress who's high on drugs all the time. Yeah, it's really, really, really smart twist, and I really enjoyed it. And another standout of the movie for me are the action set pieces that sometimes can get a bit samey in the MCU, but I think the ones in this movie are really smart. I like that set piece where he's saving all the people who are falling out of the plane. I think that's brilliant. It's really tense. It's really well shot as well. Like the geography of it makes sense. And then you get the scene right after that. Okay, I've saved these people. Let's go. And then he smashes against the truck, and the suit falls apart. And the suit falling apart, they do that joke, I don't know, 5 or 6 times, and it's funny every time for me.
Yeah, it got me every time. I was like, oh my god. Oh wait, no, it's not. He's not actually in the suit. They got me again.
Yeah.
Well, again, like the Air Force One.
Fun gag.
The Air Force One sequence, again, is one of the things where you see Iron Man do all these things, and you think that Tony's in the suit, and it turns out he's not. And twofold. Number one, that's a further of the metaphor of Tony and Iron Man being separate entities. And number two, the, Iron Man by proxy thing, having Iron Man be like an avatar for Tony, is like, it's a mirror of what Killian is doing with the Mandarin. He is putting a different face out there to do his bidding, just as Tony is putting Iron Man out there to save people while he's safely in a van with Rhodes.
Yeah.
Well, so I did have two other things I wanted to touch on before we move into our main topic. This is a Shane Black movie, and one of the most common things that people know about Shane Black is that he loves Christmas. And Christmas is included in most of his movies. I've read online it's not everything he's ever done that has Christmas in it, but it's like the majority.
But a lot of them.
Enough that people associate it with him. How important do we think the Christmas time setting is to this movie? Is it important at all?
No, I don't think so.
I don't think so, but it creates cool aesthetics, which is the reason why Shane Black
likes Christmas. Yeah,
I mean,
so
I'm not complaining about it. Yeah,
I mean, I agree.
It's pretty lights.
I think that people associate. I think it's funny that he's so associated with Christmas. When in the majority of his movies, yes, they take place at Christmas time, but it has almost nothing to do with Christmas.
And they usually don't come out in December either, which is when you would normally see movies with a Christmas aesthetic, is if they're released in December. And these aren't. This is a summer movie.
I think I read in an interview that the first time he did it, it was because he thought, Christmas lights make for cool scenery in a movie, adds some interest, even though that it's not really, it doesn't really add to the story. And then I think he's sort of a clever writer, and he became aware of the fact that he was associated with this Christmas setting, and so the fact that people associated him with a Christmas setting made him want to put the Christmas setting in all of his movies. I think that there's sort of a double direction in that thing.
The last thing I wanted to ask about Iron Man 3, how important is this movie in the scope of the whole MCU? Do you have to watch it to, fully enjoy the story of the MCU?
Well, I hadn't, because I only saw it for the first time this week, and I've seen Avengers Endgame, etc. But I think it only deepens Tony Stark and Iron Man stuff. I didn't get to say this earlier, but Hugo, I think you mentioned that he has the shrapnel removed from his chest in the very end, which, to again go back to Batman Forever, in Batman Forever, Val Kilmer says, I'm no longer Batman because I need to be, because I choose to be. And that is like some character growth on his end, and Iron Man 3 is kind of the same way. That thing is no longer keeping him alive, that thing in his heart. It's not keeping the shrapnel away. It's just now he just wants to be Iron Man. He doesn't have to be anymore. And given his MCU thing in Endgame, like I think that makes it cooler.
What about you?
Yeah, I think it just adds. Maybe it's not super essential plot, because it is a standalone film, more than a lot of them. But it adds an interesting wrinkle to Tony Stark's character. And I think the success we'll talk about this later, but I think the success of these movies is because the characters are easy to relate to care about, and anything that deepens the characters and makes the characters more interesting, that adds sort of depth to them, it is going to help your enjoyment of the MCU. Like if you have seen this movie and then you watch Endgame, it does add some emotional power to it.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think, in terms of the entire MCU, if you miss this, I think you can still fully enjoy the major events in the MCU storyline. But if you want to fully appreciate Tony Stark's character, you have to have watched this one, because it adds so much depth. And Tony, in terms of characters in the MCU, Tony Stark, having appeared first and been in more of it than anybody else, he's the most fleshed out character. And this is
for sure
a huge chunk of his story and what makes him so cool. And I do apologize if you hear my dog chewing on a chew toy. That's unfortunate.
It's okay. My cats were playing with a bird toy last week. I don't know if you could hear a little bit of squeaking on my mic, but I think we're okay.
Okay, so that's our discussion of Iron Man 3. Let's do our ranking for the film to remember. The current list is number 1, Citizen Kane. Number 2, The Thing. Number 3, It's a Wonderful Life. Number 4, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. Number 5, Rudy. Number 6, Mank. 7, Jackie Brown. 8, Sugarland Express. And 9, Godfather 3, Coda Electric Boogaloo.
Hugo, where you put it?
I would put this below Ma Rainey at number 5.
You
above
need Rudy to not...
And above Mank.
Our Rudy
I need to not
ranking
do what?
is killing Hugo here.
It really is.
It really is.
He is really struggling with that.
I would put it...
It makes it so hard for me, mate.
Well, I know that you like Jackie Brown more than Rudy, even though Jackie Brown is 2 entries below Rudy in our list, which I say because I'm going to put it below Jackie Brown at number 8, above Sugarland Express. Chris?
Okay.
As I've said, I have grown to like this movie a lot more every time I watch it, but y'all are crazy if you think that it deserves to be above anything except Godfather Part 3.
What?
I mean,
seriously,
Hugo, this is not better than Mank or Jackie Brown. Like, you're an insane person.
I don't like this. I don't like it more than Jackie Brown. I do kind of like it more than Mank.
Do you like it more than Sugarland Express?
Just because
I mean, like honestly, I don't even think it's better than Sugarland Express.
I do. I like it better than Sugarland Express.
So I think, well,
okay. So
let's
just start.
I guess
better than Godfather
below
Part
Jackie
3.
Brown.
Yes.
Better than Godfather Part 3. Yes.
Absolutely.
Better than
Absolutely.
Sugarland Express. I say no, but you both say yes.
I would say yes.
Okay.
Better than Jackie Brown.
No.
Well, no. Because
Okay, so there it is.
I wouldn't say
Exactly.
below Jackie Brown.
Exactly.
That's the problem.
You need to
That's
take the
the problem.
list in totality. I realize you don't like Rudy as much as Jackie Brown, so you're going to put this above Rudy, but you need to also look at where Jackie Brown is too, Hugo.
And that's what makes this list so much fun, because it is nonsense.
I love Jackie Brown.
No, this is getting more ridiculous and more meaningless by the week. And eventually, I mean, already when you started introing the list just this week, I started shaking my head. To those on YouTube, I was shaking my head as I did it, because this is getting stupid. It's going to get more stupid as we go on.
That's the point.
That's the point. It's
That's
so
the
stupid.
point. It has to be stupid. It doesn't make any sense to rank these specific movies because they don't have anything to do with each other.
Okay, so now we're going to transition into our discussion of MCU in general. Real quick, we'll say how important the MCU is to each of us. I think we've already touched on that a little bit, so we won't waste too much time on it. MCU is very important to me. Aside from Star Wars, this is the most watched franchise for me by far. As I said, I rewatch it every year, and sometimes more than once in a year, depending on the movies that were being released. So I've seen all of them, and I've seen all of them multiple times. What about you guys?
Hugo, go ahead.
Shall I go?
Yeah.
For me, it has been, over the years, it has been a bit of an up and down relationship with it, because I started out absolutely in love, because I was 12 years old when Iron Man released, and I went the same summer I went to see Iron Man and The Dark Knight, and I was 12, so it was great. It was a great summer for me. I remember going to see these movies in the cinema, and then I didn't know there was a post-credit scene in Iron Man, so I didn't see it. I saw that on the internet a few days later, and I I found out, like, a friend of mine at school or something told me there was a post-credit scene. I was like, oh, and I was like, oh, they're doing a universe? What is that? What does that even mean?
Continuity?
And then continuity. Oh, that's great. And then as they started coming out, I was so into them. And Avengers, the first one, I thought at the time that it was going to be sort of a big wrap-up. I was a little older. I sort of, after that, I sort of lost interest for a few years. And then what got me hooked back was Guardians of the Galaxy. When Guardians of the Galaxy released, because I didn't see Winter Soldier in theaters, I didn't see Dark World in theaters. Thinking back on it, that was the time, so I didn't see Iron Man 3 in theaters as well, I suppose. And Guardians of the Galaxy was the one, oh, they can do this? Because I thought, oh, well, they've run out of the main character. Because I wasn't a huge comic book guy, so I didn't really know the characters well. And I was like, oh, they've finished some of the major characters. They've already done this story. Like, Avengers is done. And maybe I'll watch the next Avengers when it comes out, but I'm not that interested in these. And then I watched Guardians, and I loved it. And at that point, I went back and saw the movies that I'd missed. And from then on, I was pretty much hooked. So, yeah, from then on, I've seen all of them in theaters. I liked most of them. Like, some of them I liked a bit less, but overall, I've been really into them.
Right. I think I'm less high on the MCU than you guys are, which is fine. It's interesting you said, Hugo, that you were 12 when Iron Man came out. I think that would have been a big difference for me. I was 12 when the first Raimi Spider-Man came out in 2002, and that was an incredibly important movie in my life, as was Spider-Man 2, as was Spider-Man 3 to a lesser extent. But, by the time Iron Man came out, I was 18. Reasons. So I was 18 when Iron Man came out, and, like, I saw it in theaters. I thought it was great. I loved it. But, like, at that point, at the ages of like 17 and 18, my movie watching kind of shifted to, like, I discovered Scorsese, I discovered Tarantino, I discovered the Coen brothers and Paul Thomas Anderson, and, like, that kind of is where my taste headed that direction instead. Not that I didn't still like these movies, like you said, The Dark Knight came out the same year, and that movie just knocked my socks off. I saw it in theaters like 4 times. And I think that I kept up with the first few movies in the MCU. I'm looking at the list now. I saw... so there's 6 movies in Phase 1. I saw 5 of them. I think I saw all 5 of them in theaters too. I was only missing 1. Mm-hmm. But then in Phase 2, of those 6 movies, I only saw 1 of them. Up until Iron Man 3. Iron Man 3 was the second Phase 2 movie that I saw. So I kind of fell off the table around the time I went to college or just after college. But like you, Hugo, Guardians of the Galaxy brought me back. That was before Iron Man 3, that was the only Phase 2 movie that I had seen. And I adore that movie. And, I guess we'll talk about that more, but, I think it's partially because of James Gunn. I'm inclined to like James Gunn's movies. And I think that's like a strength of the MCU is to give the keys to talented filmmakers, whether it be James Gunn or Taika Waititi or Ryan Coogler, etc. And let them make the movie that they want to make. And I think that's a big strength. And also the overall creative vision from Kevin Feige. I haven't seen all these movies. I saw the Avengers Endgame and Infinity War in theaters and all that kind of stuff. But I think I appreciate the MCU more for like the overall, like, it's just like impressive and unprecedented, like what they've been able to do over the last 10 years. And like I appreciate it. Yeah, I appreciate it from like someone who wants to understand the media landscape and analyze what's happening and why some movies are being made and why they're making money. Like, it's really, really impressive. Like, the creative vision that Kevin Feige and all those people at Marvel are bringing to this. And it's also super impressive. I think these movies overall are high floor, maybe low ceiling also. But high floor is the more important part of that statement. Like, there's a baseline to this. Even the worst MCU movie, I think, is pretty good.
It's still pretty good.
And that's, again, that's super impressive to have 23 movies that a lot of them are at least like B+. That's like really, really hard to do. And so I think I'm more impressed by, I don't know, like what the MCU movies mean for movies as opposed to like individual movies that I connect with, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess I should say, obviously I was a big comic book fan. I was a comic fan as a kid, and so when Iron Man came out, Iron Man was already my favorite character before the movie came out. That was a decision I made basically just because I liked his armor. And so he
fine reason.
Because Iron Man,
It's cool armor,
Tony Stark as a character, like, is a very flawed individual, and not the kind of person that I think most children would, fully understand why he's a cool character, because he was an alcoholic and and a playboy and all these things that were not good role model for children, sort of things. But I just loved his armor, so I was so excited when Iron Man the movie was coming out, and so I was bought into the franchise from jump. So it's cool that. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think it's cool that like Iron Man is the one that kicked it off, because like the other comic book movies that existed before Iron Man, whether it be Raimi Spider-Man or Burton Batman or X-Men, like those all, at least for me, growing up in the 90s, I had some relationship to all of them, but I didn't have any kind of relationship with Iron Man, because I never read comics, but like there was a popular Spider-Man cartoon, there was several Batman TV shows, there was several Superman cartoons, and X-Men cartoons. So like I was aware of X-Men and Spider-Man and Batman because of the cartoons, and so when the movies were made, I already had a relationship with those characters. I had no relationship with Iron Man, having not read the comics, but like I still connected to the movie, and I thought it was really good.
Well, and that's actually in the history of the MCU. That's why Iron Man was first, was because Marvel at the time was not yet owned by Disney, and Marvel did not own the rights to their biggest franchises to make movies out of them. They didn't have the rights for the X-Men. They didn't have the rights for Spider-Man. They didn't have the rights for the Incredible Hulk.
Really?
Which they made a deal with, I believe it's Paramount that owns the
sounds
rights.
right.
It's Paramount, yeah.
But
even the first Iron Man has a Paramount.
Right, because first Iron Man
so.
was distributed by Paramount, and so they had made a deal where the Marvel Studios were working with Paramount to make the Hulk movie, which is how how this MCU was starting. Was they started with a character that they could make a movie for, because they it was one that they did still have the rights for, and Iron Man is at the time was basically like B tier superhero.
Yeah.
Not one of the most popular, certainly not one that people who weren't diehard comic book fans would be fully aware of. And so you're right, that's what makes it such a fascinating jumping point. I think ultimately they start with Iron Man because he is achievable. It's reasonable enough for people to buy into as a possible thing. Like, oh, a guy could make a suit of armor that could fly. Yeah, sure. That I mean, it's a little fantastical, but it's digestible.
The first hour, we'll talk about Iron Man in a bit, but the first hour of Iron Man is really, really good. I think the second hour is it's more whatever, but the first hour is fantastic. And I think that kicking off the MCU with like you said, like a believable but also like high stakes, guy in a cave built, using his smarts to survive
with a box of scraps
out of there. Yeah, that's really good. That's great, and that's a great way to kick off. That I think people bought in.
Tony Stark could build this in a cave. Sorry, that was my Obadiah.
Very good, very good.
So, kicking off with Iron Man is maybe it was related. It was because of the rights and whatever, but it is a stroke of genius. It is the strength of this series. Is that they caught lightning in a bottle by casting Robert Downey Jr. in this role, because he's just perfect.
Jon Favreau, when he was hired on to direct, he told them, "I want Robert Downey Jr. for this role."
Yeah.
And then they were
and
as soon as they did the first screen test, it's like, yeah, that's Tony Stark. You're absolutely right. Go ahead. Sorry.
And he's so good at this as this character, and he anchors the whole franchise, because all of the big moments in the franchise, Tony Stark is there. Tony Stark is effectively the protagonist of this whole story. And the fact that they were, regardless of what happens in the future of the MCU, which we'll talk about in a bit, but the fact that they were able to tell this complete story from Iron Man to the first Avengers movie, where we have the post-credit scene where we see Thanos for the first time, to Avengers Endgame, and even to some extent to Far From Home, is incredible. And it really stands on the shoulders of Robert Downey Jr. and that original movie, and the fact that they were able to hook people to this character who reappears throughout the whole series.
Okay, well, so let me go into some
Yeah.
of the questions that I had prepared. Why is it that we think that the MCU is successful where other shared universes have failed?
Do you
Good
want to?
question.
I have a few thoughts.
Hugo,
I
you
have
go
a few
first.
thoughts on this. Because I think what made the MCU work, first of all, is that they started, yes, with the idea, oh, we could do a shared universe, but if we don't, let's get to Avengers. Let's build. Oh, we have these characters that we can play with. We have Iron Man, we have Thor, we have Captain America, Hulk to a lesser extent. Let's get to Avengers. Then from Avengers, if you read interviews from Joss Whedon, who directed Avengers, he put in Thanos at the end. Him and Feige decided to put Thanos at the end, almost as a joke. They weren't entirely sure if this project was going to be able to sustain itself long enough to do Thanos. But where they were intelligent then was to build on each movie. Because if you go and look at the fine details, the universe doesn't always fit 100%. But where the smart ideas come is they have an idea of where they're going, and so they can retroactively write the movies in between to get there. And also, when the films were starting to get a bit stale, when the people were saying, oh, after Avengers Age of Ultron, which I kind of like actually, but after Age of Ultron, a lot of people saying, oh, the bubble is about to burst, that these movies are getting too big for themselves and whatever. That was the point where they decided, oh, okay, we need now to take interesting directors. They had already done Guardians, but we need now to take interesting directors and just let them go crazy, because the people are going to enjoy it. And they said, oh, Russo brothers, you made Captain America Winter Soldiers. That was good. Build your story. Then you get James Gunn, who did Volume 2 and is going to do Volume 3 of Guardians. Then you get an interesting director like Scott Derrickson, who his previous movies weren't fantastic, but visually he's an interesting director. You give it to Taika Waititi, Ryan Coogler, and that's where the success comes. When I think a lot
Edgar
of these
Wright.
other studios, Edgar Wright, they didn't manage to make that movie, but it would have been great if he did. Yeah, that's why I'm not a huge fan of Ant-Man, because while I watch it, even though it's pretty good, I'm like, oh, this could have been an Edgar Wright movie. This is depressing. But yeah, I think a lot of these studios saw the success of the MCU and wanted to replicate it instantly. They wanted to jump in with the universe idea in mind. Well, they didn't realize that the MCU started relatively small. It started from one movie at a time. If you look even at the release years, like the first 6 movies of the MCU come out in 4 years, right? From 2008 to 2012. And it's only afterwards that they started accelerating. It's only afterwards that they started having multiple movies a year, even 3, and now they're accelerating even more with all the shows.
The wait for the
what
first
other
Captain
studios
America,
did? Oh,
I was going to say, the wait for the first Captain America felt like an absolute eternity. I was checking IMDb once a month, and they're like, come on, when is it coming out?
yeah, because it was 3 years later. And what these studios that are trying, like the Legendary Monster universe or the King Kong and Godzilla, what they're doing is they are jumping into the first movie with the universe already in mind. And you need to start with a movie first, establish some characters that people care about, and then you can build a universe.
I think
that's the
basically
difference
what it comes
between,
down to.
in my opinion, the MCU and a lot of
Like
different
the
universes that
DCEU
didn't manage to hook people as much.
I also think that
the DCEU,
the fails in a lot of ways because they decided they were going to go whole hog into the universe after they'd already made Man of Steel, and so then that movie was not set up to be the foundation of a shared universe.
No.
And so then,
but then they went full on
things on top of it
with everything else.
And they went so quick towards the I mean, Batman versus Superman has the Trinity on screen. Batman, Wonder Woman, and Superman. That's insane that they jumped straight to that.
Yeah,
and the only way to really appreciate those movies is to know the comic books. That's another thing. The MCU is really smart at letting you into these characters even if you don't know the comic books.
What was that, Josh?
Let's not forget the email attachment scene in Batman vs Superman, which was maybe among the most inorganic way to introduce characters that brought that movie to a screeching halt, and that movie didn't have much momentum to begin with. I think that listening to you
depressing,
guys,
honestly.
listen to you guys give your answers to why the MCU's worked. I'm sitting here thinking, I think you need to give a lot of credit to the Avengers movie, the 2012 movie. Honestly, that movie walked such a fine line between, you know, using the 4 movies that came before it, but also like being standalone enough that like you didn't quite need to have seen the other ones, but also like it helps if you had. It walked such a fine line that it made it, you know, first of all, a hit. That movie printed money. It's unbelievable how much money that made. Yeah. But also, you know, gave people buy-in moving forward. Like, I hadn't seen Thor when I saw the Avengers. I had seen Hulk and Iron Man and Captain America, but I hadn't seen Thor. But like, I also didn't really know who Hawkeye was or who Scarlet Witch was, but I didn't care. Like, from that point on, I was in. And a lot of people from that point on were in. I think a lot of people may have seen Iron Man and then just went straight to the Avengers, and like that worked for them. Or they or like me, or they'd seen all of the ones leading up to the Avengers and it still worked for them. But regardless, like coming out of the Avengers and the strength of that movie, you know, was the payoff to the previous 4 and the previous 4 years, and it tied everything up in a neat little bow. And now people are like, oh, okay, so now like these movies are tied together, so I need to see all these now. Like, you know, if I hadn't seen all of them before, moving forward I want to, because I liked this movie so much and I want to be in on it from now on, you know. And I don't want to undersell how important it is that movie be good and that movie work for people who had or hadn't seen the previous movies. And like, it walked that line so well, and it made people want to be part of the universe moving forward, I think.
Can the success of the MCU be sustained going forward? Are we still excited for their new projects, even with so many of them coming out all at once?
We'll find out. They're gonna test those waters for sure. They're definitely not. They're going up to bat to try. But
I know that I'm excited for all of it. I'm obviously
sure.
I've made that pretty clear. There's the floor that they're going to have. People like me are going to watch all of this stuff regardless. So they have that base. The question is whether or not people like Josh will jump back in on some of these.
I'm not even sure it's people like me. I think it's more like what I go to the movies more than the average person, you know, when movies were open, but like the average person who only goes to the movies a few times a year, usually those few times will be for a movie like this. A big like pop culture phenomenon they want to see to be in the know about, you know. So but you know, the media landscape is changing, and how many of these will just go to Disney Plus versus theaters, I don't really know. I don't think anybody knows at this point. But also, like, I think the biggest obstacle moving forward for the MCU is the changing of the guard. You know, in comics, different people are like there've been multiple Green Lanterns. There's been multiple Spider-Men in the comics. And like, how people respond to that will be the real test of how the MCU will be moving forward. Because right now, like, I'm not the first person to make this observation, so I'm aping other people's opinions. But like, movie stars don't really exist anymore. Like, there's no longer the case where like Tom Hanks is in a movie and like just him being in the movie will put butts in seats on opening weekend. But Iron Man being in a movie will put butts in seats on opening weekend. The characters are the stars as opposed to like the actors playing them. Yeah. Like, you know, Robert Downey Jr. being in Dr. Dolittle did nothing for Dr. Dolittle. Tony Stark being in something is important. But, you know, Tony Stark is theoretically not going to be Iron Man anymore, and Chris Evans may or may not be Captain America anymore. So like, moving forward, will people still be with these characters? I don't really know, but I think that's going to be the biggest test.
That's the test for
seeing if that works. Yeah.
For me personally, having loved the journey so far, I want to be excited. Like, I'm going to watch. I'm going to give stuff a shot. However, I do have some doubts. I do think they are doing a bit too much all at the same time, because I made a list and it's on the outline, and this year we have 6 TV shows, which are miniseries, but still, and 4 movies releasing all in the same year. That's a lot, especially considering that the way the TV shows on Disney Plus are being marketed, as opposed to what the TV shows were on Netflix and the other shows that they did with Marvel, is that they are going to be an integral part of the universe. So they are saying that, if WandaVision is going to tie into, I think, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness and whatever. And so you have to see these shows to fully understand the movies. And I'm wondering where oversaturation becomes a problem. I'm wondering where the general audience, because again, I liked all these movies, so I'm going to give the shows a shot, even if if I eventually get bored or overwhelmed by the quantity, I'll jump off of the train. But I'm wondering what the general audience will do, because as you said, Josh, the star is Iron Man, Captain America, Spider-Man. Those are the big characters that bring people to see the movie. And so once those characters are not there anymore, and you are having to essentially start from the beginning and get people invested into new characters, I feel like the MCU is doing, as I said, the other universe jump in with an idea, they do too much all at the same time, and then so people don't care. And I feel like the MCU is running the risk of doing the same thing, because they got to this massive conclusion. It was the highest grossing movie of all time. People loved it. I loved it. I was crying in theaters at Endgame.
I cried last night.
But it does feel, it does feel final. It does feel like that's the end of the saga. That's the end of this part. Are you going to be able to get me invested in new characters with Disney Plus shows? I think that's the big question. Because if that doesn't work, then are the movies going to be as successful as they used to be? I don't know.
Go ahead, Josh.
I was going to say that, I agree with you that the enormous catharsis of Avengers Endgame is both that movie's biggest strength, but also the MCU's biggest obstacle. It does feel like the end of something.
Going forward.
Whether they can get the wheels moving again is going to be, I think, tough. And I have every faith in them because of what they've accomplished so far. But I also think that I haven't watched WandaVision yet, as you said, Grizz. It dropped last night, but the response so far has been overwhelmingly positive, including from people like myself who aren't necessarily MCU heads. My Twitter timeline is a lot of movie and film people, and everyone has got a very high approval rating across the board, including people who aren't inclined to be there open night for this kind of stuff. So maybe that is that's helpful for sure for
it bodes
movies
well
in
for
the next
future.
phase. Yeah, for sure.
Well, this actually is a good jumping off point for my last question on the topic.
WandaVision is such a weird movie. Yeah, sorry.
So the last thing I wanted to talk about before we reveal our top 5 MCU movies as a group, I wanted to talk briefly about directors in Hollywood. Just we don't have to go into it because a lot of people have weighed in on this stuff already. But directors like Martin Scorsese, who have said that these movies aren't cinema. And other directors, Martin Scorsese, Ridley Scott, Francis Ford Coppola, David Cronenberg. I pulled up this article from Esquire that has a list of dozens of directors, saying things that they don't like about the Marvel movies. We don't have to go too in depth on it, but what do you guys feel about that whole controversy?
I don't think it's a controversy
Josh,
at all.
you want to go ahead? Yeah.
It's not a controversy. I'm trying to pull up Scorsese's comments so I can speak about them in context.
I can read it too if you'd like.
Go ahead. Yeah.
He's about the MCU. He says, "I don't see them. I tried, but that's not cinema. Honestly, the closest I can think of them, as well made as they are, with actors doing the best they can under the circumstances, is theme parks. It isn't the cinema of human beings trying to convey emotional, psychological experiences to another human being."
Tell me where he's wrong. Honestly, in that.
The part where I would say he's wrong is that they aren't trying to convey emotional and psychological experiences. We just talked for 30 minutes about Iron Man 3 and how they were conveying emotional and psychological experiences.
I think it's spectacle first, and if you get emotional, psychological experiences, that's a nice extra thing, but I think that's secondary to the spectacle, which I think is Scorsese's point, and I completely agree with him in that sense.
But I think
my thing with what Scorsese says is that I don't think the distinction of cinema versus not cinema is a good distinction, Because by that same logic, then Indiana Jones isn't cinema, made by his friend Steven Spielberg. You know, I don't like the sort of gatekeepy distinction of what is cinema and what isn't cinema. It's being made, it's being shot, it's being acted, and it's being projected in a cinema. By that definition, I believe it's cinema. I don't think a movie has to be good to be cinema. That's what I mean. I understand what Marty is probably wanting to say is, there's a distinction between populist entertainment and art film, and obviously the MCU is populist entertainment, which, maybe Scorsese doesn't like it, and that's fine. But the only part that I don't appreciate too much is the distinction between cinema and not cinema. But I understand what he's saying, and, it's, what did you expect from a,
my biggest problem with
Scorsese type person?
My biggest problem with it is the implication that you can't gain anything from these movies. And I've had multiple emotional experiences from watching these movies. And I'm not going to pretend that these are, the best made movies of all time. I love them.
Yeah.
And I think that they do convey emotions, and they're relatable, and so there are things to be gained from these movies, just as there are to be gained from anything that any of these directors have made. And that's my problem with it. Is, in addition to the gatekeeping, it's that they're telling me that my experience is not correct, that what I experience from these movies is not true. That's my issue with it.
I think you may be reading
and I think
between the lines a little bit, though, with what Scorsese's saying specifically.
I mean, that may be. I've heard the audio of audio of him saying these things, because people have asked him about it 1,000 times since then. He's not saying it with malicious intent.
Right. No.
But it
exactly.
But it is sure, yeah, it's a little reading between the lines, but that doesn't mean that what I'm reading isn't there. Yeah.
Fair.
So
fair.
And the thing is, when he originally made the comment, it was in the context of him not being able to find financing for his movie, which was The Irishman.
Which was the last question. How are the MCU movies affecting the abilities to be made?
Yeah, I think, okay, in the specific case of The Irishman, we'll talk about the general idea in a second, but in the specific case of The Irishman, that movie was made for, reports say, over $180 million. Okay? So how, and I understand Scorsese saying, I can't find money, so it must be the popular movie's fault. I don't think that's the reason why he couldn't find the financing for that movie. I think the reason is there's no way a 3.5-hour period drama about quiet movie. It's not even it's not even exciting and actiony in the way that maybe Goodfellas is, for example. It's a quiet, introspective, slow, really long, brilliant film. But there's no way that movie is going to make enough money at the box office to justify a $200 million budget. Yeah,
I don't think that the MCU is the reason.
That's what that's what I'm saying for that specific movie. Now, do we want to discuss how the fact that the superhero genre is dominating so much has affected the ability for certain types of movies to be made? I think there is a point there. I think the mid-budget movie is the one that's suffering the most, because people at the don't go see these movies for them to be viable at the box office. That's fair. I think that is a fair criticism. But is it a criticism of the superhero movie, or is it a criticism of the audience that isn't interested in smaller stuff?
Well, it's a feedback loop. It's a feedback loop.
It is.
People
it is a bit of both. It is a bit of both.
Audiences only want what they're given, and so they're responding to what they're given. However, the MCU, to specifically pick on the MCU, is, I think, missing the point. The MCU is a symptom of a media landscape. A media landscape of big budget tentpoles and also franchises, which people aren't willing to take a chance on seeing a movie that they're not semi-confident they're going to like, and they're semi-confident they're going to like something that they're familiar with. And so that's why, franchise tentpoles have been the order of the day. And yeah, like you said, Hugo, the mid-budget movie, which unfortunately, because that's my favorite kind of movie, that's suffered. And so now movies only get made with that kind of budget and that kind of sensibility if they're going for Oscars, which is why I've said on this podcast before, I really like Oscar movies and like the movies that come out around Oscar season. So
yeah, I mean, it's definitely
that's
the
not the MCU's
landscape.
fault. That's the media landscapes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's one of those things. Is like you said, it really shouldn't be a controversy because he's not. He doesn't have to love every movie that I love. I get that. And the MCU has, and other superhero movies have had an effect on the media landscape that it is affecting the rest of the industry. And so maybe there's some, resentment, or not even resentment, but difficulty separating the two, and that can lead to people saying some things about these movies that they really mean about movies and not specifically the MCU.
The industry as a whole.
The industry as a whole.
It's just the MCU just happens to be the most successful one. And so
we could go for
focus on that a bit more.
We could go for a literal hour on ways that the industry can fix this, on getting so that those middle budget movies actually can still get made, like for instance, programs like AMC's A-List or Movie Pass before it went under gave people opportunities to take chances on movies that they might not have taken a chance on. But obviously that wasn't sustainable for Movie Pass, so there's still so much more to discuss there. But
R.I.P. Movie Pass.
R.I.P. Movie Pass. God, I abused that. I really it seriously could have been me that made Movie Pass go under just by myself. Okay, well, so now let's go into our listing of the top 5 MCU movies as we've determined by averaging our individual rankings.
So we all submitted our top 10s.
We all submitted our top 10s,
yes.
And if it was your
you
favorite movie, it got 10 points, and then I did math. Whoever has the most points, is the one that's going to be on the list. So
I'm already
me and Josh don't know the list.
Fine.
Yeah, I'm just going to put them all up at once and just read it to you guys. Hang on. There we go. Okay.
So we don't know them, so it's going to be a surprise.
So Josh and Hugo don't know them, and it's up on screen now. Number 5, we have Iron Man.
Okay.
Which I think
the
original Iron Man. I think that's a perfectly reasonable place for that to end up on the ranking. It's personally my number 2. But it was.
I have it at 8, but I don't mind it. It's a great movie. I think it's fair that it's there.
I think it's a great first hour and a so-so second hour. It was in my top 10, but not in my top 5.
Yeah, obviously, like I said, my fanboyism for Iron Man definitely pushes it up my rankings. I do not deny that.
But also, as we talked about, like the way that movie was able to kick off.
It earns points for that.
Yeah, there's something to be said about that for sure.
At number 4, we have Captain America: Civil War. Civil War.
Oh,
cool.
Civil War.
Hey.
Yeah, I have it a bit lower. I think mine is at number 10, just because. I don't know. I have some thoughts about that movie, but just I think it doesn't have as much weight and consequence as it should when the story is starting.
I think that's one of the first. So. It's in my top 5. I think that's one of the first to begin to introduce weight and consequence. I realize that big Avengers movies come later, and that's when the big consequences happen. But I feel like that's the first one that's. I don't know if I'd even call it standalone. It's one of the least standalone of the movies in the franchise, but they do it pretty well. I think. I don't know.
Well, and it tells us a completely unique story to the MCU where they actually face the consequences of their actions. Which you don't see in the rest of the MCU.
At the end of the movie, it doesn't really matter because when the next crisis comes, they are going to get back together. So I mean, the reason why they fight could have been avoided if they just talked. In my opinion, at least. I think they needed to create more of an incentive for them to fight. Because then the fight, even during the fight, they constantly have to repeat, oh yeah, but we're actually still friends, right? We're not actually fighting. And then at the end, Tony and Cap do fight, and then it's serious. But it's I don't know.
Well, I think that when they're
still
fighting
like-
and
I
they're
still
saying,
really
but we're
enjoy that
still
movie,
friends,
by the
I think that they're saying that, you know, in the hopes that they can still salvage this, it's really denial of the
Yeah.
situation they're in. But we don't need to go into it. I do
Whatever.
love
We don't have to
Captain
go
America
do
Civil
it either.
I do love
I still
Civil
like
War.
it. I still like it.
I think Civil War is also helped by the fact that it came out like 2 months after Batman v Superman, which Civil War is benefits from that comparison. I think.
Yeah, it's a lot better than Batman v Superman. It is impressive that they were able to pull off that kind of story at that macro level. Like so many characters fighting against each other, and it works. And
Plus,
especially the setup of the Sokovia Accords is brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah, it introduces both Tom Holland Spider-Man and Black Panther, who will both be enormous figures in the franchise moving forward. So that also gets points for that, I think.
And it got points from me for, despite it being a Captain America movie, Robert Downey Jr.'s performance in that as Tony Stark is gut-wrenching at times when, you know, towards the end there. And I just absolutely love it.
That final fight is great.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anyone who would complain about it being in the top 5. I mean, they might. I mean, like they might say it was lower for them, but no one's gonna be like, okay, you guys don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Number 3, Avengers: Infinity War.
It's my number 3 as well.
It's number 5 for me, and I believe it was
number 4 for me.
Similarly ranked to Hugo's for Josh, right?
It was number 4. Now that I'm looking at my list, we need to put Infinity War and Endgame as one thing. I think. I don't know. I mean, it's not
unfair. Not unfair.
It's a 6-hour movie that really works as a 6-hour movie, and like Infinity War only works because Endgame after it, and Endgame only works because it has Infinity War before it. Just my take, but I mean, I'm fine separating them. Whatever.
I disagree. I thought Infinity War was. I mean, like obviously, okay. I don't completely disagree. Infinity War needs to have Endgame, but I loved Infinity War without having seen Endgame. Right, like it was already in my top 5 because of how cool that story is, and I love a story that I love when the universe isn't afraid to take some people off. You know,
and then immediately bring them back.
Well, not everybody gets to come back all the time, but you know, you didn't know who was going to come back. You didn't know for sure that everyone was going to come back. You didn't know, you know. I liked Infinity War quite a bit for that ending.
I mean, me too.
Yeah, me too. And the fact that it's structured in a way that Thanos is the protagonist of the film, because the other characters you already know from the other films, so it doesn't matter that they have to give them character development. They give it all to Thanos. Is the stroke of genius of that.
The number of people when that movie came out who was like, I kind of get Thanos. Like they were like,
yeah, that was worrying.
I was like, hold up, guys. I think you
chill out.
Might be missing some points here. But I do like that one quite a lot. And then number 2 we have Guardians of the Galaxy, which is not a huge surprise.
Yes,
that was high up on all of our
lists.
Yes. I had it was number 6 for me, but I'm not disappointed to have it at number 2 because honestly, numbers 4 through 8 on my list are all about the same level for me. That was my dog who just hacked. Sorry about that.
Yeah, Guardians for me showed me that this universe could exist outside of the Avengers. As I said before, it's the one that hooked me back in. And it showed me that Marvel were able to, let's get this interesting director and let them do something cool.
And take some characters that no one has any attachment to.
And
make them icons. Everyone loves Guardians of the Galaxy. It's funny. It's probably second funniest movie to me in all of the MCU. And the MCU does have a lot of really good humor.
But also more emotionally resonant for me than probably any of the movies that came before it. Like that image of, the opening scene with Peter Quill's mom, and then the way that comes back in the end, like that
it's great.
Hit me more than anything else in the MCU.
And then what they do with the Yondu in the second one is also really
also very, very good. And disclosure, James Gunn went to the same high school that I went to. And so, like, I had a chance to meet him back in, like, 2007 when he was promoting Slither. Like, I met the guy.
Oh, that's
and
awesome.
so I had no idea who the Guardians of the Galaxy were or really what it was, but I knew he was announced as the writer director of that back in like 2010 or something crazy like that. So I'd been like following the production very closely, and I was very excited for it. And that's why I hadn't seen a Marvel movie in theaters in more than 2 years, but I was there before opening night for Guardians of the Galaxy, and it did not disappoint. It's one of my favorites for sure in the franchise.
Yeah, and for me, I also had had a bit of a break from the MCU, and for me it was space movie,
right?
Space movie. I'm going to see it. Yeah,
I think the reason Guardians, in addition to what we've said, but the main reason for me why it stands out so much amongst the MCU was that it took a leap of faith that, like, okay, we can do anything with this franchise at this point. Mm-hmm. We're going to make you care about a tree and a raccoon.
Yes.
As long as you have, I think, a good writer director, and like, you care about the characters, and again, humor and heart, which that has more than any other movie. Like, yeah, it works, and like anything will work as long as you make a good movie, people will respond to it.
So that brings us to number 1 on our list, and I don't think anyone is surprised to hear that Avengers Endgame is number 1 in our list of the MCU. I believe it was our unanimous number 1.
Which again, I'm now it should be Infinity War / Endgame, but yeah, I agree. It's hard to beat the catharsis of Endgame.
Yeah, and look, I have some criticism of that movie as well, because I think the final battle, as awesome and huge as it is, could be a bit more colorful. I think that's something that I think about a lot of movies in the MCU, that they look a bit bland. I think the cinematography could be a bit more colorful, a bit more exciting in the way that it is. And for example, in Guardians, they have colors that pop all the time. But regardless of that, the fact that they were able to conclude this story in such a satisfying way after 10 years, and everybody loved it, and it worked emotionally, it worked story-wise, it was exciting, and it's a 3-hour movie, and people still cared so much about these characters that they went to see it and they were satisfied by it, is endlessly impressive to me.
It doesn't feel like a 3-hour movie to me. It feels pretty well paced.
No.
Which I can't say that about every MCU movie. There are several MCU movies that I ended up, especially in my rewatch this week, it became glaringly apparent that some of these movies are too long.
But they were a bit long.
And or move too slow in parts. And I did not feel that way with Endgame, and that's coming after having watched all of the MCU in 1 week.
Right. I don't want to undersell like what it was like watching Endgame in a theater on opening weekend. Like that was something special and something that I'm not going to forget anytime soon.
It really was.
Just the crowd reaction to certain things in the last third of that movie, and I think I appreciate Endgame more than like I like it. If that makes sense. Like I'm looking at my list. Like I if you ask me right now what I wanted to watch, I'd rather watch Guardians of the Galaxy than Avengers Endgame on any given day.
Yeah.
Like I think I probably like Guardians more, but like I appreciate what went into Endgame, and like to your point, Hugo, what they had to pull off and how they pulled it off and how well they did it. And again, like just it's unprecedented to have a 22-minute movie lead up over 10 years and have it pay off as well as it does and have it work for people as well as it does. So it's something special for sure.
Well, that is our top 5 MCU movies. So we're going to wrap up now. Next week's film to remember, we're doing The Matrix Reloaded, and Hugo, you're running that. What are we talking about next week?
We are talking about the Matrix trilogy because why not? So it's going to be an episode similar to our Godfather episode. So Reloaded is the one that we go a little more in depth on, and we actually rank it with our films to remember. But we are going to talk about the trilogy as a whole and how we feel about it. And and if I can suggest, maybe don't watch the whole Animatrix because maybe you don't want to. It's a little boring. But there's a 15-minute short in the Animatrix that's called The Second Renaissance. It's only 15 minutes, and you can find it on YouTube, and it's great. Yeah, it's great context to that story. If you feel like it, you can watch it.
All right.
And we're talking about The Matrix because Matrix 4 is coming out in 2021, right? That's the point of this.
This is in our series of film to remembers to get us hyped for movies that we are already hyped for.
Okay.
Hell yeah.
So anyways, thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, share, comment, tell your friends. We really appreciate
5 stars.
anything to get the word out, we would really, really appreciate. And we will see you guys next week.
Do we have a post-credit scene?